He buried me without ever putting me in the ground. My name, my worth, my existence, erased while I was still breathing. But life has a way of circling back, and the son he discarded became the man he could never control. My name is Michael, and this is the story of how I rose from the ashes he left me in. All my life, I wondered why my father looked at me with nothing but hatred. Then I realized I wasn't his son, I was her memory, the one she left behind. He gave another boy the life that should have been mine. But in the end, it wasn't wealth or power that destroyed him. It was me walking away. My name was once Michael Cartwright, a name heavy with history, but empty with affection. Now, I wear Michael Rivers like armor now. And if you ask me why, I'll tell you a story not of hatred, but of silence. Of a son raised in the shadow of his father's bitterness. My mother left when I was 5. She didn't just leave, she gutted my father's world in a single strike. She took the house, the car, the savings account, and the pride he once wore like a tailored suit. She walked out of that front door with nothing but coldness in her eyes, and she never looked back. But she left me behind. And in doing so, she carved a scar deeper than divorce papers or court rulings could ever cut. From that day forward, my father, Douglas Cartwright, looked at me as if I were the ghost of his betrayal. I was her shadow, her echo, the constant reminder of the woman who had humiliated him when he had nothing. He never hit me. He didn't need to. His cruelty was quieter, sharper, more efficient. He fed me, yes, but that was all. No bedtime stories. No hugs. No happy birthday. When other kids showed up at school with balloons or cakes, I came with nothing but silence. I dressed myself for school while he sat in the kitchen, cigarette smoke curling in the air, his hand wrapped around a cheap glass of whiskey. When I cried, he turned the TV volume up. When I asked for help with homework, he didn't even look at me. His only words, "Figure it out." At 9, I learned how to boil water because I was hungry and no one else would. At 10, I sold pencils and scrap paper at school just to afford notebooks. At 12, I stopped speaking unless necessary. Words didn't matter in that house. Silence was the only language anyone listened to. And then came Elijah, a foster kid, 7 years old, wide-eyed, innocent. Everything I used to be before the silence swallowed me whole. Douglas adopted him within months. I remember the day as if it were burned into my skin. I stood in the hallway, watching through a crack in the door as my father lifted Elijah into the air, spinning him around. And then I heard it. Laughter. My father's laughter. A sound I hadn't heard in years, a sound I had once begged for. He called Elijah his son before the adoption papers were even signed. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the peeling paint on the walls. I wasn't jealous. Not exactly. Jealousy requires hope, and I had long stopped hoping. I was numb. Still, a small, foolish piece of me wanted to understand. So I asked. I asked why he never held me like that. Why he never looked at me with pride in his eyes. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He just stared right through me, his face carved in stone, and muttered for words that branded themselves into my soul. "You're your mother's boy." And just like that, I understood. I wasn't his son. I was her punishment. The living, breathing reminder of the woman who broke him. The woman he would never forgive. So he buried me without ever putting me in the ground. After that night, something in me closed for good. Childhood ended, not with a bang, but with 4 words. You're your mother's boy. From then on, Douglas poured everything into Elijah. Birthdays turned into grand occasions. Balloons, cakes, parties in a backyard filled with music and laughter. I watched from the upstairs window, staring at a life that was mine by blood, but never by love. I never received gifts, not even a card. When I asked once, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "I don't celebrate mistakes." At school, the difference was humiliating. Elijah wore new clothes, polished shoes, the kind that made teachers smile and classmates jealous. I wore hand-me-downs until they fell apart, stitching holes with thread I stole from the art room. When Elijah turned 10, Douglas bought him a guitar and paid for private lessons. He'd sit in the living room, listening proudly as Elijah plucked out clumsy notes. When I asked if I could try, Douglas barked, "Don't touch what isn't yours." It wasn't just about gifts or opportunities. It was the way my father's eyes lit up around Elijah, a light I had never once seen turned on me. Elijah could do no wrong. When he spilled juice, Douglas chuckled and ruffled his hair. When I accidentally cracked a plate washing dishes, he slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "Why can't you do anything right?" By 14, I stopped asking questions. I stopped trying to impress him. I moved like a ghost through the house, unseen, unheard. If I was quiet enough, maybe I could disappear completely. But invisibility has a cost. It makes you cold. It makes you hard. It makes you old before your time. Elijah thrived. Music recitals, top grades, family vacations where I wasn't even invited. He was the son Douglas chose. I was the reminder of the woman he despised. And the more Elijah shone, the darker I became. By 16, I had learned to live without affection. I cooked for myself, worked odd jobs at the gas station down the street, and saved what little I could. Nobody noticed when I stayed out late. Nobody asked if I was safe. One night, after another dinner where Douglas laughed with Elijah as though I didn't exist, I climbed the creaking stairs to my room, sat on my bed, and realized something terrifying. I could die in this house, and it wouldn't matter. Not to him, not to anyone. So I packed a bag, a couple of shirts, a notebook, and the $48 I had saved. I walked out into the night without saying goodbye. There was no shouting. No one ran after me. And that silence, that cruel, unbroken silence, was my farewell. I squatted in broken apartments. The kind with shattered windows stuffed with cardboard, where the draft cut through like knives and the stench of mold never left your clothes. Nights were spent curled on the floor with my jacket for a blanket, listening to the sound of rats scratching inside the walls. Hunger was a constant hum in my body. I'd eat crackers gone soft with damp and leftover bread. However, some of the bosses I worked for offered to sleep in their shops after I cleaned up. I drifted from job to job, hauling crates in warehouses where no one remembered my face, scrubbing greasy pans until the hot water cracked my hands open, sweeping floors that never seemed to get clean. Every paycheck slipped through my fingers, spent on rent for rooms that smelled of piss or on meals that barely kept me alive. I didn't dream. I didn't hope. I survived, but a small flame lived inside me. When others slept, I haunted construction sites and alleys, scavenging discarded planks. I'd sit cross-legged on the cold concrete, running my fingers over the wood grain, imagining shapes that might emerge if only I knew how to coax them out. I stole Wi-Fi in cafes where I couldn't afford coffee, hunched over my phone, replaying videos of craftsmen sanding, carving, joining. I taught myself patience one splinter at a time. What started as distraction became discipline, and discipline grew into obsession. By 27, I was someone else. I wasn't Michael Cartwright, the mistake, the ghost of a broken marriage. I was Michael Rivers, a man with no ties, no favors, no family. And for the first time, I had something of my own, a workshop. I built tables, beds, coffins. My hands, once cracked and raw, now shaped beauty out of wood that others abandoned. I began hiring the kind of boy society ignored, scrappy, restless, aching to prove themselves. My shop became more than business. It was a refuge, a second chance. For the first time, my name meant something. And Cartwright was dust. It was then that Anna walked into my life. She came to the shop one afternoon to commission a dining table for her tiny apartment. She wasn't like the customers who wanted sleek, perfect things. She asked me about the wood, about my hands, about why I did this work. She lingered in the sawdust, unbothered by the noise of tools, laughing at my blunt answers as if she'd known me all her life. I didn't know how to handle her. I was naive when it came to love. To me, affection was foreign currency. I had no idea how to spend it, no idea how much it was worth. I stumbled over my words, kept my eyes down, afraid she'd see through the cracks in my armor. But maybe that was what drew her in. She wasn't naive. She was experienced. She carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that only comes from a life fully lived. She had been loved before, hurt before, and yet she still believed in connection. Maybe it was the contrast that bound us. My awkward honesty against her graceful ease. My silence against her laughter. She once told me that what attracted her was the way I looked at her, like I couldn't quite believe she was real. And she was right. She became my light, the warmth I'd never known but always needed. With her, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't a scar. I wasn't her punishment. I was simply a man, flawed, unpolished, but finally seen. For a while, I almost believed that love could rewrite everything. I didn't keep tabs on them. Not on Douglas, not on Elijah, not on the family name that had once been mine. I had carved my own world out of sawdust and sweat, and I thought the past was buried deep enough that it could no longer reach me. But life has a way of circling back, dragging ghosts to your doorstep when you least expect it. Elijah grew into the golden child my father had always envisioned. He graduated top of his class, took over Cartwright Holdings, and became the shining face of the company. His photographs were everywhere, on billboards in business magazines, even in those glossy lifestyle articles that celebrated young visionaries. There he was, smiling in sharp suits, giving TED Talks about resilience, redemption, and second chances. And standing just a step behind in some of those pictures was Douglas, his hand proudly on Elijah's shoulder, his face glowing with a pride I had never seen directed at me. That was his son, his legacy, his pride. I ignored it, or at least I told myself I did, until one evening, sitting across the dinner table from Anna, I noticed she was quieter than usual. She pushed her food around her plate, her brows drawn together as though she was carrying something heavy in her chest. "What is it?" I asked, setting down my fork. She hesitated, searching my face, then finally spoke. "Michael, I heard something today. About Elijah." The name hit me like a forgotten chord, sharp and distant all at once. I hadn't spoken it aloud in years. "What about him?" Her voice softened. "He's sick, very sick. Myelodysplastic syndrome. Do you know what that is?" I shook my head. "It's a blood disorder. The bone marrow stops making healthy cells. It leads to severe anemia, infections, bleeding. And it's usually terminal. They say he only has weeks." I felt the air leave my lungs, as though someone had pressed a hand to my chest and squeezed. "Elijah," I whispered. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "A friend of mine works at the hospital. She said it's bad. He's already weak. He can't even walk on his own anymore." I leaned back in my chair, the room tilting slightly. Of all the things I had imagined might befall the Cartwrights, this cruel, senseless disease hadn't crossed my mind. And in that moment, something unexpected happened. I mourned him, not as my father's chosen son, not as the golden boy who had everything I was denied, but as Elijah, the boy I remembered from my childhood, the wide-eyed kid who laughed easily, who used to share his candy with me before Douglas pulled him away. Elijah had never been cruel to me. He had never mocked me or treated me as less. If anything, he had looked at me with the same confusion I felt. Two boys trapped in a storm neither of us created. He didn't deserve this. If anyone did, it was Douglas. My father should have been the one lying in that hospital bed, pale and weak, gasping for each breath. Not Elijah, not the boy who had been handed my place, but had never asked to steal it. But life doesn't follow justice. Life doesn't listen to fairness. Life writes its story in ink we can't erase. For days, I couldn't shake the image of him wasting away. My nights were restless, filled with dreams of Elijah's face, once vibrant, now hollow. And even though I had every reason to feel cold satisfaction, what I felt instead was grief. A grief tangled with guilt. Because part of me wondered if my silence all these years had made me complicit, that maybe I had abandoned Elijah too, in my rush to escape Douglas. Anna held me as I wrestled with it. She pressed her hand to my chest, whispering, "It's not your fault. You couldn't save him. You were just a boy yourself." Still, the thought gnawed at me. Elijah had been a good person, a kind person, and yet his life was ending in weeks, while Douglas Cartwright would live on, carrying the same bitterness in his bones that had poisoned everything he touched. The irony was Shakespearean. Elijah had no children. The disease, combined with the treatments, had left him sterile long ago. The doctors confirmed it, which meant that once he was gone, the Cartwright name, the name Douglas had tried so hard to preserve through him, was facing extinction, except for me, the son erased, the last branch, and that, more than the disease itself, was the cruelest twist of all. I didn't go to Elijah's funeral to be seen. I went because grief doesn't care for pride. He was gone before I even had the chance to tell him what he meant to me, before I could tell him that in some ways I admired him, even loved him, though I never said it aloud. Elijah wasn't my enemy. He was never the reason for my scars. He was simply caught in the center of someone else's bitterness. The day he was buried, rain washed down like the sky itself was mourning. The city felt heavier, slower. The papers praised him as the brilliant mind who turned Cartwright Holdings into a model of recovery and vision. His face shone from every glossy cover, a beacon of second chances. And all I could think about was how unfair it was, that the illness had stolen him, that the one man who deserved such suffering, Douglas, still drew breath. But that's the cruelty of life. It doesn't consult us before choosing its victims. That night, I sat in my workshop alone, hands trembling over a half-finished coffin I had been carving for a stranger. My chest felt hollow. My eyes stung, but the tears refused to come. That's when Anna came to me. Anna had always been near, but in that season of mourning, she became something more. She didn't try to fill the silence with cliches about time healing wounds. She didn't tell me to be strong. She simply stayed. She brought me warm food I barely touched. She lit candles when the shop grew too dim. She held my hand without asking for permission, grounding me in a world that suddenly felt too fragile. I had never known love, not in a way a man is supposed to. My mother left when I was too young to understand it. My father's silence with a void so wide it swallowed every definition of affection. So when Anna smiled at me, when she touched my arm, when she leaned into my chest, I felt unworthy. Naive, that's what I was. Naive in love, stumbling like a blind man through a lit room. I didn't know how to read her subtle gestures, how to interpret her sighs. She was experienced. She'd had relationships before me, heartbreaks that taught her patience and resilience. Perhaps that's what drew her to me. The rawness, the innocence of a man who had never been loved properly and therefore cherished every drop of it like it was sacred. At times, I thought she pitied me. Other times, I thought she was fascinated, like a painter drawn to a canvas that had never been touched, desperate to leave her mark. But whether it was pity, fascination, or genuine love, I didn't care. I drank it all in. Nights blurred into weeks. Weeks into months. We built something steady, something real. My shop grew, my name, Michael Rivers, started to mean something more than just survival. And Anna stood beside me through it all. When I finally asked her to marry me, my voice shook. I expected hesitation, maybe even rejection. Instead, she laughed, a warm, unrestrained laugh that reminded me of water spilling over stones, and said, "I was waiting for you to finally ask." The wedding was small. I want it that way. No press, no Cartwright headlines, no ghosts of the past lingering in pews. Just close friends, a handful of employees from the shop, and Anna's family. For once I felt whole. As if the broken boy I used to be was finally buried beneath the oak tables and carved frames of my new life. Until he showed up, Douglas Cartwright. He entered the church like a storm, uninvited, unannounced, unashamed. His hair was thinner now, his face more sunken, but the arrogance was the same. He carried himself like the world still bent to his name, as if he hadn't been reduced to a relic living in the ruins of his own choices. My blood turned to fire the moment I saw him. My chest tightened. Rage, pure, unfiltered rage, boiled up and drowned the joy of the day. Who invited this man? I wanted to scream. What audacity, what sickness made him think he had a right to stand here on this day of all days? Anna's hand squeezed mine, but it couldn't calm the fury coursing through me. He approached slowly, ignoring the stares, the whispers. For a moment, I thought he might turn back. But no, he stopped directly in front of me, his eyes hollow, his voice quiet. "Michael, I just wanted to see you." The words barely registered. My mind screamed louder than his voice. "See me? Now?" After decades of silence, of neglect, of turning me into nothing more than her punishment. "You dare?" I stepped past him, didn't look back. My jaw clenched so tightly I thought my teeth might shatter. That day should have been the clean slate. Instead, it reopened every scar he had ever given me. For months, he didn't return, and I let myself believe maybe that was the end. Maybe the ghost had finally retreated into the shadows where he belonged. But ghosts always find a way back. It was a rainy afternoon when he came to my workshop. The sawdust clung to my arms. My tools hummed with the steady rhythm of creation. And then I heard the door creak open. He stood there, smaller, weaker, as though Elijah's death had carved something out of him that couldn't be replaced. His eyes carried a desperation I had never seen before. He didn't say my name. He just looked at the oak coffin on my bench. "How long you been doing this?" he asked. "Long enough to bury the past." I answered without looking up. There was silence, a heavy silence that pressed into the marrow of my bones. He's gone," he whispered. "I know. There'll be no one left," he said. "No one to carry the name." I put my chisel down slowly, my pulse hammered in my ears. "What name?" "Cartwright," he croaked, his voice cracking under the way. "No," I said, my voice low, firm. "You made a choice. You chose him. You chose to hate me for her. You poured love into a stranger and left your own blood to rot in silence." He was crying now. His shoulders shook. "Please, you're my son. Take the name back. Reclaim what's yours." The audacity of it made me laugh. Not loud, just a bitter exhale. I walked to the wall, pulled down a framed certificate, and thrust it toward him. It read, "Legal name change. Michael Cartwright, Michael Rivers." "It's done," I whispered. "Let the name die with you." The paper slipped from his hand. He fell to his knees in the sawdust, begging in silence. And I walked away, but words burned deeper than silence. I turned back, venom on my tongue. "I wished you were the one that died. Not Elijah. He was a victim. You're a heartless son of a bitch. You'll die alone. I can promise you that. Your name will be forgotten, erased, dust on the wind. And I hate that part of you that is inside me. That part makes me sick." His sobs filled the workshop, but I felt nothing. That night, I made a promise. Not just a thought whispered into the void. A vow carved into my soul. Douglas Cartwright would die alone. Forgotten. Stripped of legacy. I began with letters. Anonymous, precise, calculated. To child care services. To community offices. I told them about the neglect, the cold cruelty, the incompetence of a man unfit to raise a child. I signed them under names that could never be traced back to me. Then came a lawsuit. I hired a lawyer, one who specialized in child abuse cases, one who knew how to dig up records, witnesses, evidence buried under decades of silence. Piece by piece, we built the case. Testimonies from neighbors who remembered the boy left outside too long, the teachers who saw the emptiness in his eyes, the doctors who noted the lack of parental presence. Each document, each statement, was another nail in Douglas's coffin, one I intended to seal long before he drew his last breath. The court hearings were brutal. Watching him stumble through lies, watching the mask crack, was almost cathartic. He tried to deny, tried to shift blame, but the weight of truth pressed down until there was nothing left but shame. The community turned. The same people who once respected the Cartwright name now spat it like a curse. His reputation crumbled. His legacy disintegrated. No business, no heirs, no allies. He was left with nothing. And me? I built everything he had denied me. A wife, a home, a name that carried weight not because of inheritance, but because of sweat and blood. When I lay in bed beside Anna at night, I felt a strange peace. Not joy. Joy had long been stolen from me, but satisfaction. A quiet revenge, colder than violence, sharper than rage. Douglas would die alone, forgotten, and I would live out my life in peace. Sometimes, when the nights are too quiet, I wonder if I went too far. If my vengeance was another chain binding me to him instead of cutting me free. But then I remember his eyes at my wedding, the audacity of his plea, the decades of silence that shaped me into a scar. And I whisper to myself, no, he deserved it. Still, I ask you, the one listening, the one watching, what would you have done in my place? Did I go too far or not far enough? Drop your comments. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching.